So the ease of doing business today having come to become Business Reforms Action Plan has itself seen a lot of right changes and adaptations which were so required for understanding what's happening for business on the ground. So I'm glad to see that year after year, we are bringing in newer ways of making it a lot more real-time and a lot more robust so that what it indicates really means something. And that is the change which not just in the name, but also has shown that states believe in healthy competition among themselves and they're not averse to the system of being rated in some way, not necessarily ranked, but being rated in some way. They're not averse to that. Equally, some best practices followed by some states have now become so beautifully documented, it is easy for policymakers in some of the states to adapt it, saying if they could do so well, and by taking this measure, they've actually made it possible for industry to feel that the governance elements are really coming on board. Many other states have also adopted those methods. Earlier it used to be just look at this one state or that one state. Now it's for each one of them for their specific achievements year after year. So you find that best practices are getting replicated very quickly. You're also finding that there is a healthy way of looking at competition. States are not averse to it. And above all, what it does eventually is that industry feels that things are moving fast in this time period, particularly after the pandemic. Although this started much before the pandemic, during the pandemic, it is that, like the way when we talk about fintech, like the way we talk about payment systems, the digitization program which was taken up in such mission mode actually gave relief during the worst of the pandemics. Similarly, you find that many of the steps which were taken up even before the pandemic stood the test of time during the pandemic. And as a result, you find there is an appetite for wanting to change a lot of things which are so entrenched. And therefore, today the call for reform is not because maybe it will bring some good, but it's because, please, it's necessary, do it. And we are with you in doing it. So that is where I think a government where the Prime Minister himself is ready to listen to the industry. And not just once, periodically on different issues at different times with different sectors, on different issues of consideration, investment consideration, facilitation consideration, credit availability consideration. On every one of these considerations, Prime Minister himself has been accessing, even during the COVID period, online, if not in person, and therefore clearly indicating that this government is willing to listen and take steps in response. So I would think the reforms which are happening in such speed is more responsive reforms rather than reforms because they've been listed once upon a time that this is a hurdle, so it has to be removed. It's more responsive. It is every now and then hearing those who are the stakeholders and responding accordingly. So when the Prime Minister himself does it, naturally the ministers of every department are clued into it. They follow up and make sure that what has been heard by the Prime Minister is acted upon, and acted upon to at least some satisfaction of the industry. Things which are left over are carried forward further. So unlike the days of 91, where reforms were almost given to us, that you will have to do it. Circumstances were such, I'm not faulting anybody. But when reforms were handed over, saying you do these for a better economy, now there is no compulsion on anybody. But here is an administration which understands that when reformed, when eased out, systems bear better results and systems hold better for industry, eventually making the life of every Indian citizen better. No compulsion, but a thorough understanding of what will make every one of our lives better, what good governance can help us, not a superimposing government where it should not be, but where it should not also be absent. And as a result, this inclination towards a responsive reform is actually bearing the result. And in a federal structure, that's what is making all states to work together. Piyush referred to my GST Council meeting of last 2 days. It was definitely in such a spirit that all the states worked together. There was a lot of input sharing. And everyone has increasingly come on board to understand that it has to be everybody's effort. Particularly at a time when we are coming out of the pandemic, with all the steps being taken by the union government, so are the state governments doing their bit. So it is going to be a collective effort. And therefore, I think the way in which commerce and industry have worked towards making newer set of reforms also come into the old listed reforms, keep reforms real time, add measures which have never been touched earlier, and make sure that it is going down from the union to the state to the district to the block level. So every elected government, even at the panchayat level, is now conscious that they will have to undertake such steps so that everybody's compliance will come down, the nation will be better governed. And that is why when we sit in the GST Council also, the thought is how do we take these measures to the bottommost layer. And in the finance ministry, the approach, although guided by the principles of devolution given by the Finance Commission, every time where there is a possibility, we link it to reform-based. Whether you're borrowing as a state, you may borrow X amount or a certain more percentage, provided you undertake some tangible reforms. Unless we have this approach of nudge people to do it, it's very difficult to achieve by one diktat, by one order, by one office memorandum. And therefore, this element of nudge is brought into every layer of administration that states today understand the need for reforms. And one last point, which I'd certainly say for government and each of the department, and for the industry separately, is it's fine for the Prime Minister, it's fine for the ministers, it's fine for government to interact with the states and also between them talk about what reforms actually can give us or deliver for us. But I think there is also a need for capacity to be built. At least I can speak for the Department of Revenue, which in the name of wanting to bring efficiency in revenue collection has spent a lot of time with the states to improve and build capacities. And that is why you find when the GST collection is going up, it's going up not just because people are paying more tax, but also loopholes are plugged. And also newer, unrolled, unregistered, unassessed people are coming on board, so that is happening. Now, if that kind of capacity building towards a comprehensive approach has to be made from the states, many of the states would still need that hand-holding. And I would think it should be part of Business Reforms Action Plan to have a layer of capacity building at various different levels of administration, be it the panchayat, be it the states, and of course, still with the state governments. And therefore, I would think it's important for the department, not just the commerce and industry, but all others, because all of us are taking this approach of government as a whole, government as one. And the last point, which I'd like to underline here, is I said, yes, we take up reforms by nudging the state governments, by gently requesting them to understand the importance, by talking to the panchayat level officers. But I found most effective is the way in which way the industry is involved. When industry, which is prevalent, and many of them are prevalent in more than one states, approach their respective state governments and speak about and continuously engage with them to say the virtues of, taking one step forward. State governments do come around, even if they have a justifiable practical difficulty in undertaking some steps. So I would think the nudging cannot just be the central government, cannot just be some officers. Industry has a very big role to play. You have seen that access to the Prime Minister, you have seen the access to the ministers are actually giving you results. Government is responding to you. Government is taking action. Sometimes incomplete, sometimes not up to your expectation, but little by little we are moving. Although Honorable Prime Minister's repeated advice is no incremental changes, you should look at big reforms. We can't be spending years over, so little changes happening. You will just not be able to deliver that kind of a impact on the society. But even with that said, I would think it's not just the union government alone which can do it. Industry, I would actually request you, I'll appeal to you that you should have that many engagement with each and every state's administration, each and every state's government, to say as to how you would like changes to come about within that state. And collectively, of course, that can be replicated in other states. So I wouldn't want to take much of your time. I'm glad to be here. I was initially associated with the ease of doing business. Today I can see it expanding in its scope, bringing in newer aspects, and also making it lots more relevant for India. I appreciate the effort that the Minister Piyush Goyalji has put in, and also his entire team, in getting this kind of a robust mechanism, wherein, and I was briefly checking up if I've understood it right, I can't see a difference between small and big states, which is all very well, because efforts made anywhere, small or big, are going to have very big changes in its own territory, but also in the expanded area. So I think matching up a lot of small states' big efforts with the big states' big efforts also has a message. So very well done, Commerce and Industry. And also thank you very much for all your presence here this morning, particularly after a good relief-giving big rain this morning in Delhi. And I hope this exercise will keep us all glued to the fact that India should be constantly on the mode of reforming its own compliance mechanisms.
If you like the video, do like, comment, share and subscribe.